Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 50th episode of Beyond Talking Points. I'm surprised we've made it to 50,
Am
but
I
we
your
have.
50th?
You are the 50th episode, Kohei.
Nice
Um,
round number.
so,
I am
as you
honored.
see, we have another guest. A couple times we had our friend Keegan on, and Kohei is in the same Nietzsche Discord server as Keegan and I. So, and he wanted to come on and talk a little bit about power. What is power, and how is power related to ethics and morality? Um, so I was just going to give an opening spiel and then give it over to Kohei to kind of flesh out some of his own ideas more. Um, so power, of course, is one of those words which can be used in very different contexts, or used in it can have very different definitions in very different contexts. And then if we're talking about like, is power related to morality, that kind of muddies the issue even more. Because at some level, if we think about it from a very like Machiavellian perspective, the perspective of realpolitik, you almost get the impression that, well, morality or right or wrong, it doesn't really matter at some level in terms of an abstract kind of entity, an abstract ideal. What matters is, your ability to get done what you want to get done, and you get it done however you need to get it done. But most people wouldn't say that power is the basis for morality. You might be able to use power to kind of get what you want, or you might be able to use power to kind of enforce your ideas. But and that's what I would say. I would say that power and morality, although not completely separate, are not one and the same. I would say that and I would say that just because someone has a lot of power or influence doesn't necessarily make their opinions or actions right or wrong. I am I am of the opinion that right or wrong, or morality, ethics, it's a difficult it's a difficult issue to grapple with. It's very complicated. It's not it's not necessarily very easy. You can't there's no mathematical equation to say like what's right or wrong exactly. You kind of have to weigh different intuitions and different pros and cons to various actions to derive such things. Um, before we were before we started recording, I kind of was engaging with Kohei a little bit on power and its relation to kind of the Darwinian idea, which actually I think the term was coined by Herbert Spencer, of survival of the fittest. At some level, you could almost say that from the perspective of nature, in the state of nature, you might be able to say power is the basis of morality. Although I guess I would probably say really there is no. I would say that nature is not necessarily moral or immoral. It just is. But our ancestors, of course, if there was a caveman and he was in he had a cave, and another caveman came along and clonked him upside the head with a club and took away his cave. That's whether that's right or wrong. It's like, well, that he has that power to do so, and so he did it, and that's all that matters, I suppose, in the state of nature. But that's a lot of thoughts that have been jumbled up in my head. There's so many places. There's so many paths this conversation can go down. I just wanted to kind of get some general thoughts out there, thoughts that I've been thinking about. So, Kohei, would you like to kind of respond to some of that, or at least talk some about your ideas on what power is?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, thanks for having me on. Uh, Good old 50. Um, yeah. So I guess you kind of hit it on the nail when you said it has a lot of when you say power, it has a lot of connotations, I guess. And so if one person says, we need power, there might be a misunderstanding, miscommunication, um, because the person hearing the word might have a different understanding of it. And when I say, oh, we have to be powerful, people often associate it with like brute force, right? Like violent means, any means necessary. I'm taking a lot more over encompassing approach on it. I'm thinking of it just simply potential, or you know one's capabilities to put something into action, I guess. Uh, so if I have the power to swing a bat very fast, then I could do it. I have that power. I have that potential to do it. But I might not have the potential to swing a bat as fast as a baseball player. So like as you can see from that example, it has nothing to do with like um, being abusive or being like a tyrant, things of that nature. It's just all it boils down to what you can and cannot do in a technical sense. And then so you guys can ask, okay, well, what does this have to do with like Mr. Hazelwood's mention of like survival of the fittest? Well, it really has to do with not just survival of the fittest, but uh, the opposite end, the deaths of those who cannot uh, play the game of natural selection. So I'll explain. So in survival of the fittest, what that implies is that whoever is relatively fit, if there's a line, and if you're above this fit line, if you're above the standard, you can live, and if you're not, you can't reproduce, and so your gene line ends. Well, that means you have the power to survive and reproduce. But it does. But when we say survival of the fittest, we often have connotations of like it's often presupposed that like survival is the goal, which isn't really the case when I talk about power, right? Like if you cannot help but find someone and reproduce, that means you do not have the power to die off like an antinatalist, voluntarily or otherwise, right? So you do not have the power to die. So in that sense, like power isn't necessarily uh, aimed at a certain direction. It's not aimed at certain. It's not aimed at. It's not always aimed at winning. It's not always aimed at surviving. It's not always aimed at victories, right? You also need the power to do its opposite, because anything that um, can does happen, that means that there was a power for that phenomenon to function. So that's all I mean by power, really. And then I'll bring the mic over to you, because you just wanted me to define power, and then I'm under the assumption that now we are gonna like situate it in like in the context of morality, as you mentioned, in the context of real life examples, some philosophical dialogue, like is what I'm saying really legit? So yeah, I define my terms. So I guess I'll let you take it from here.
Is it fair to say, before you jump in, Matt? I just wanted a quick point of clarification. Is it fair to say then that not only is power, in your definition, not only is power like potential, power is sort of almost self-control, or like the ability to go against your own instincts in that sense? So it's not, as you say, it's not just the survival of the fittest, like I'm going to survive and reproduce and pass on my genes. It's the ability to say I'm not going to do that. It's the ability to kind of have a maybe this isn't the correct word, but is power kind of synonymous with the will, and but a
It's
will which
it's
is
yeah, the ability to go against your instincts is a manifestation of power. So is the ability to let yourself be overcome completely by your instincts. That's also power. Like you have to, if you don't have the power to let yourself be overcome by your instincts, right? Then you can't do that. And if you don't have the power to say no to your instincts and have discipline, then you can't do that either. So the power is basically potential, right? It can go in any direction. It doesn't necessarily just, it's not exclusively going against your instincts. That can be an example of power manifested, but there are different other directions you can take. right? And the degree to which you have the power to do one thing is probably the degree to, not always, but probably the degree to which you cannot do its opposite. At least it's impossible at the same time. Completely, yeah. So yeah, power is just potential, really. I don't want viewers to think that, oh, I think I don't want them to think that, like, oh, it's brute force. Like we're not gonna take no for an answer. No, it's basically saying it's I'm like saying it is what it is kind of situation, right? If you have the power to say no, that means you have that capacity. If you have the power to say yes, and you have the capacity too. And so no matter if, so by that sense, I'm not saying, it's not that I'm saying that brute force is not a manifestation of power. I'm just saying that it's not the only manifestation of power.
And I think that's a really good way to, I guess, to kick things off, because it is important to define terms. And if we are going to have a broad conversation about power, we don't want to confuse things that could be easily misinterpreted. I do well, and I think to what you're just saying, a good example of that, if you want to think about, I guess, something more in recent political terms, but the whole idea of Trump being a big, strong man that's powerful, well, didn't really actualize in a lot of policy, because he was so he was so much like a kind of a brute. So his whole thing was like, I want to negotiate with certain countries. I'm going to be tough, but that also he didn't have necessarily good trade deals as an outcome, because even though he was willing to show the brute force type of power, he didn't actually have the power to say use his influence in an effective manner, right? So if you want to think of power not necessarily as something that is like, if you don't want to think of it as literal strength, you have to think of it as maybe the potential to actually influence other policies, right? Especially when you think about so when you think about the political sphere, it's not just saying like, oh, somebody had power because they were an authoritarian. You could say, well, somebody could have power because they're just very deeply influential. And there are ways to do that peaceful, but you should still think of that as power. I think that's the distinction you're trying to lay out, especially because the undertones when you hear power is authoritarianism. And you're kind of saying that that's not inherently true, and that there's no reason to start from that assumption.
So while he did have the power to exercise brute force, maybe, yeah. So in that limited context, yes, he was very powerful. In the context of failing to meet certain goals because of those brute force, he was also powerful, right? He was powerful enough to fail. In terms of succeeding in certain goals, he was powerful in some and he wasn't. So really, it's very contextual. It's very relative to the endpoint that you're going. And while we're going here, I do take it that, like, Mr. Hazelwood, the moderator, knows that we do have a time limit. I'm sure you'll get it fixed, but I'm sure in the recording you could probably just splice it together. But yeah, okay. Yeah. So like, Mr. Keck, you understand, and I'm confident that both of you understand where we're going with this, right? So, I guess if I understand you correctly, once we clarified it, you wanted to put it in the route. Did you wanted to discuss did you want to go over clarifications on the concept, like on the philosophy, on my philosophy? Did you want to kind of situate it in like real life examples? Did you want to situate it into the morality as a real life example? I'm basically good with anywhere from this point, now that I've just found my terms.
Matt, do you want to kind of dig into more on the philosophical end, or should I just start kind of? I don't want to say grilling Kohei, but I guess I'm going to be kind of inquisitive, because I'm curious about some I'm curious about ways it manifests itself in real life. But I don't know if Matt wants to delve more into philosophy.
I guess the consensus is that, like, we could all see it work on paper, but then on practice, is it really legit? And then if Mr. Hazelwood doesn't really see it on paper either, now is a shot to kind of go over the philosophy.
Yeah, so I've asked you this question off of air, but I think I want to ask it on air again, in case any listeners who are more philosophically minded are kind of thinking about this in the back of their minds. Does your concept of power? So in the introduction, I mentioned, or earlier on I mentioned the phrase will, or the word will. Does your conception of power have anything to do with Friedrich Nietzsche's conception of the will to power? Now I don't know that much about the will to power. None of us are philosophy professors, but when you talk to me about power, it reminds me very much of Nietzsche, and of course, well, we mentioned Darwinism earlier. Nietzsche was influenced by Darwin a great deal. At some level, he was kind of extrapolating Darwin and putting Darwin, even though he wasn't a social Darwinist either, he was kind of taking some Darwinian ideas and applying them to applying them to everyday like human society. And I think he was it was when he was in the, I want to say it was when he was in the German military. Don't quote me on that, but he just had this had this realization one day when he was looking at German soldiers, or Prussian soldiers, of course, at the time, and he had this realization that, oh, what is important in life is every individual's will to power, every individual's desire to kind of get somewhere, or to overcome his or her obstacles and to dominate, if you will. So I'm curious your response to that, Kohei.
Yeah, actually, first of all, don't quote me on the Swiss part. All I know is that he was a medic. He was in the realm of medical fields. All right. Yeah. So I'll just give you the answer that I give off here last week, I believe. My understanding of Nietzsche mostly comes from secondhand sources, and he kind of and from my understanding, he kind of understood the will to power as a manifestation of sorts. So if something exists, um, then that is basically just like that existing object is it imposing itself onto the world, almost, right? So I don't know, like if this microphone exists, right? But then if there are, for it to exist, there must be some kind of power within the microphone so that it doesn't like go into atrophy, right? There must be something holding it together. I do agree in that regard, except I do not know how far we can take it. Like, for example, I was reading a book, and like Ernst Jünger claimed that Nietzsche claimed that like a piece of painting is a will to power, right? And I don't know if that really counts, right? Like, does he mean a piece of painting insofar as like the painting is not ruined, like it's still a paint, it's remaining a painting? I don't know what he meant by that. So my short answer is we I can confidently say that there are similarities. I am not confident to say that they are the exact same, just because I do not know enough of Nietzsche, right? And I'm not gonna be like, well, it is the same. We're on the same page, or we're not on the same page. However, I would say that if a phenomenon were to exist, that means because that's basically just a manifestation of the power behind it, right? It was from potential to realization of the potential, and therefore, I don't know if it is the will to power, but I do think that it is a manifestation of power. And if that means the same thing, then great. If then me and Nietzsche are the same in that regard, but I don't want to make any firm yes or no answers. Sorry to dodge a question like that. I don't want to be a politician.
Okay, so I'm gonna hijack the conversation real quick.
All right, so we're recording, right? Yeah, we are. Yeah.
And I don't know why I'm getting feedback on here, even though it says it's muted. So I'm just gonna close that for now. Okay, so to skew the conversation a little bit, to kind of go into more, I guess, practical terms, it's not to say that your philosophy or the way you're conceptualizing things might not work, or might be wrong if you apply it. I don't think that's what I want to get at. I think I have this view of a lot of philosophical ideas that I hear about, where there are like two categories of errors that I see happen often. I'm an ANCAP, so I guess an example of the error I see with a lot of philosophies is they try to usually be too overarching, too overly simplified, and they try to explain too much of the world. And I think they usually end up failing miserably. That's why I think a lot of errors in government involve like bad central planning. And then I think the other error is kind of where me and I think Matt have hit a lot of roadblocks when we talk about philosophy, where I'll hear a lot of interesting ideas, but I think they are interesting ways to think about the world, or maybe if you want to reflect on a problem, you can reframe it in certain ways. But I'm not convinced that there's a lot of, I guess, utility from them because they're almost too broad. So what I'm interested in what you're saying. I think there is something there. I think potential, like to actualize anything, you need to have a certain amount of power and potential, and you have to be able to do it, or else you can't actualize that action. And this has a lot of implications on, I guess, real world things, because you don't want to try to do things if you don't actually have the potential to do things. And if you're aware of certain things, then it might make your life better or might make your life worse. So I can see some utility in it, but I guess I'm curious how much your thoughts on power actually interact with maybe the way you perceive. I guess I'd break into three categories, like your actual views, your personal life, like things you do, like choices in your life, and then actual political action, I guess, is the one that would probably be most, I guess, obvious that people might be thinking about. And I think if you say, no, it doesn't really interact with these things, I think that's a valid answer. I just kind of want to know, I guess, the scope of what you're arguing.
Oh, okay. So I guess you're basically saying, all right, so I have this view. How applicable is it? Is it on a small scale, a peer? Is it on a tiny scale? Is it on a little larger scale, like how I interact with the world? Is it on a big scale, like existence itself? Is that what you're saying? Like how applicable my idea is? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So like there are a lot of ideas that people put out there, but they don't actually explain a lot. It's just like, here's a way of thinking about this. But some ideas, like I was going to say like a really niche political argument off the top of my head, but there are certain ideas that if you conceptualize them, it explains part of a world. So if you talk about certain incentives, then you can see how this influences like a whole aspect of things in life. So I guess what I'm saying is, can you draw conclusions from the premises you're laying out? And if so, to what extent?
Okay, sure. So yeah, like basically, like when I say yeah, so just how prevalent in our in existence is the idea that the foundation of all things is power, right? Okay, that's sure, that's a fair question. Cool. So then I want to ask, what is you mentioned a certain biggest level, right, in the world of like actual, like not like like beyond me, right, like people, like society interacting with each other, government, people, legislation, like that's the kind of scope that you're talking about, right? That's your level.
Well, it, I sure. Well, you can interpret what I said in a lot of ways. I guess it's like how Matt tried to frame the conversation in the beginning. Like, is there a relationship between power and morality? So
Yeah.
should this influence your actual worldview? Should it influence how people act in positions of high power, like in government? That
Mm-hmm.
things like that.
Are you saying should it or could it?
Well, okay. So I think this is getting to the core of what I'm asking. So I know it could, because like if the president knows the limitations of his power, even if on paper it says to some extent, if he knows that the people won't actually stand for something, then it could influence what they do.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm saying is, in your life, the way you conceptualize power, are there direct things that you should draw from it that are more rules, right? So I know off air last week when we were chatting a little bit, you mentioned your personal political views, but it doesn't seem like there's actually any relation between your personal political views and your conceptualization of power, in the sense that if you conceptualize power in your way, there's no reason why your political views follow from it. The only
Actually,
thing, okay, so, okay, yeah, go ahead.
okay. Actually, they're very relevant because one's view, which has anything to do with morality as in customs, right? So like my ideological views are basically what customs are, I think, would work best. So morality and politics are very relevant. No, I think they're very related because my views, or anyone's views, for example, is basically a view that which, if applied, would make their own lives easier. So people of, so for example, I think I raised a question last week where like uh, I don't know, like rich people tend to be more tend to be less in favor of economic less in favor of economic inequality. Um, Creative people are less likely to believe in things like tradition or things, customs like that. So I think there's a very direct relation between my beliefs and power being a focal point in my thinking, because if certain steps were implemented in the world that would benefit me, what that would mean is that it would give me more power, which would then mean that it would be advantageous to my personal well-being. Even someone that says we need to, like, look after the community, we need to be collective, let's not be so selfish, let's not just focus on me, they're usually people that if everyone was individualistic, they wouldn't be able to take care of themselves. So like by trying to shift the focus onto taking care of other people, they are essentially raising their own livelihood, their own survival chances. And so, yes, I think I do fundamentally believe that there is a very direct relation between my uh, conception of power, which is that is the foundation of everything, and my views, because my views are what allows uh, the power to manifest itself.
So,
So, yep.
oh, no, I was just gonna say when you're talking, it reminded me. So I guess I have an example of what I think might be, or how your view might play out in everyday life, and I just want to see if this is if we're on the same page here or not. Um, so something that so there's a kind of psychotherapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, and that I bring that up because the someone who engages with CBT, excuse me, is kind of trying to focus on what you have control over. Yeah, if you want to even use the phrase power, what you have power, what your powers are, what you have power over. So it's like you have the power to kind of think about things in certain ways, or kind of reframe your life events in certain ways, or but there are certain things that are beyond your control. You don't, you can't do anything about. You don't have any power over. You just have to accept them. Um, would that be a fair kind of conceptualization of how the thinking about power could affect everyday life? If you're thinking about what you're able to do and what you're not able to do, you can better you can better act in the world, and you probably won't have you'll be a bit more composed and emotionally healthy as well, because you're not worried about things that you can't control.
Yes, but not in the way that you would think. So you're thinking, okay, so if we focus on power, then if we're situating power as a focus, right, then it can help us by saying, okay, well, here's what I have power over, and here's what I don't have power over. So by focusing on this, it makes me more mentally healthy. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Whereas I would say not necessarily. I would say um I would go even deeper than that, because if you really think about power from a more meta perspective, like meta as in like beyond that subject that's doing CBT, I would say like no. What we can find from that example is that that person does not have the power to live in a sane manner, like in a mentally healthy manner, if he were to focus on what he cannot control. So he does not have that power to um, um, live mentally health in a mentally health manner if he were to focus on what he couldn't control, which is most likely why, for the sake of his mental health, the therapist is like offering him CBT. And so in this case, it's very relevant to one's what Mr. Keck's second stage, like how does it affect your day-to-day life? Well, because see, now the counselor is saying, okay, well, in your day-to-day life, let's focus on what you can control, and just, you know what, let's put what you can control to the side here. Put that in the camera, to the side here, right? So then it's like, okay, So then it's see, now you can kind of see the relevance, right? Because focusing on what you can't control and then getting away with it, by getting with it I mean like being sane, um is not within his power. So now the therapist is telling him to like focus on what he can, what only what he could control. And in this sense, it is very relevant to like his personal day-to-day life, and because now he has to like um um change how he operates on a day-to-day life. And then if we could take it a step further and say, okay, well now, hypothetically, wouldn't it make sense that if I went up to him and reminded him of all the things that he does not have control over, it would probably make sense that he would lose it, right? He would get triggered. He would have mental breakdown, whatever. He would get anxious, which is why in a lot of mental health communities, there's words like trigger words. There's right. There's concepts like safe spaces, right? Well, by and what they're how they function is that they're basically saying that for the benefit of that person who cannot deal with thinking about what they don't have power over, you cannot say these words. You have to put them in like, if you're texting it, you have to put them in like black boxes so that like they're out of sight. Um, which is almost it's not political in the conventional sense, but it is in the sense that like you are dictating how a culture works, right? In the culture of that community, you are dictating how the people ought to function as a community. In that sense, um, it hits all the nails, right? That Mr. Keka says. Does it have your actual view? Yes, because the therapist told you to do. No. Does it have your actual view? Yes, because you cannot view the world in the realm of what you cannot control. Does it affect your day-to-day personal life? Yes, because now you have to make that a habit. Does it affect the world beyond yourself? Yes, because now if it were the case that other people adhere to that way of day-to-day life, it would make your life easier in the short term, at least. Not in the long term, because you're probably not going to get stronger, assuming that you do want to get stronger, which doesn't seem to be the goal these days.
Is one more quick question, and then Matt can jump in again. Is it fair to say that people's kind of like the lives people have, whether they're supposedly successful or unsuccessful, whether they're rich or poor, famous or not famous, whether they're brilliant professors or authors or musicians or just janitors or bartenders or whatever, it all derives at some level from power, like people's if you'll pardon the phrase, like people's fate. That's I'm not saying that's a very bad way of putting it, but like the trajectory of people's lives, does it derive from their power or lack of power and everyone else's power or lack of power around them? So to steal a phrase from the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, because I think this is helpful, do we get the war we deserve because of power?
I think so. First of all, if you're a janitor, that means you have the capacity to be a janitor. Right now, I work part time as a janitor. If I'm not working part time as if I was rejected, then that means I do not have that power. In that instance, right? Maybe I could go to the next janitor employer and then I could get hired. It also now, however, well, another thing to consider is I took that job when they offered to employ me, which means that I probably did not have the power to say no. Otherwise, I would have. Now, you could say, well, it's technically possible for me to have said no. Yes, but there were circumstances that didn't make me say no, which means that I probably did not have the power which means that those circumstances overpowered me. That's why I said no. So the fact that I said no meant that I couldn't have said yes. And that if you kind of get what I mean, because even though it's technically physically possible for me to have said no, the fact that I did say no is indicative that the powers that be veered me to say no rather than yes. It overpowered my ability to say yes. In that sense, I couldn't have said no.
Does this relate to like then determinism and free will, or is that just a totally separate conversation?
Yeah, because I would just add that what you just said, I had like a whole line of thought, but then the where you ended up going with that thought and ended up making me think that you might be a little fatalistic,
Yeah,
as in, yeah,
I'm a biological determinist. Yes.
okay. I was just curious on that. That's a whole nother can of
Yeah.
worms.
You,
Do
you
do
look
you want to?
you look scared though, Hazel. Is that a bad word?
No,
Is
no,
that
I'm
is that
not.
is
I'm
that a
not
no
scared.
no?
I'm fine.
Okay.
I was just. I was thinking.
um.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
You're scaring me now.
I'm okay with derailing that train of thought then, because I just don't know if that's something we really want to go into. Okay. So to bring things back a few steps, I I want to try to reframe a little bit. So when I tried to ask about your view on power informing politics, you gave me an answer that makes sense, but it wasn't, I guess, how I meant the question. You kind of said that it informs politics in a way that I would think of like how you could cite the book Rules for Radicals for tactics of accumulating power or actualizing things. But I guess what I was trying to confirm or clarify is just that a lot of people will put out some sort of philosophical grounding, like you can imagine John Rawls's Veil of Ignorance, and then he lays out this hypothetical in order to say that people should be in favor of X, Y, and Z policy, like a bigger social safety net, and then these other things. So when I asked if your view of power informs your politics, I didn't really mean in terms of how to actualize them in practice. I more meant which politics you ascribe to. So it's more of when you think of power in this way, is it more likely to make you a socialist or a capitalist?
Mm.
It doesn't really. It seems very neutral on that front. It's
Yes.
just more of saying like you have to contextualize it in the base of power, or else you're not going to get anywhere. So it's just more of a way of thinking about things if you actually want to be,
Okay.
I guess, successful in a paradigm.
So yeah, so you were rather asking which specific policies would my conception of power gravitate me towards?
Yeah, or if that's even relevant.
Okay.
Is the scope that broad?
Yes,
I guess.
yeah. It would be the policy that gets me the best bang for the buck.
Okay, so this is something where you kind of said that a little bit earlier, and then that kind of rose a question for me. And this is similar to it's weirdly similar to when Ayn Rand talks about people being selfish. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with her thoughts on that, but
I know
to
of her. I actually have her books.
okay, so I think a brief summary of her view on selfishness is like if you have a husband who, well, if you're married to somebody, you love them a lot and they're dying, and you're taking care of them, she would argue that you are to some extent being self-interested and selfish because you love and care about that person. So even though you're doing acts of service, it is still in your own interest. Now, if you were a martyr for no reason, she would be disgusted by you. Because the person who's taking care of a loved one, she is saying, well, at least you still have your own self-interest at heart. So I guess what I'm getting at is what you just kind of laid out, the best bang for your buck. Is that really compatible with certain people who are millionaires, and then there's a bunch of millionaires that want a very low certain types of tax rates, like capital gains tax rates, but then there are plenty who go out there and say, I want the government to tax me harder because I don't deserve my money, and that's pretty much what Warren Buffett says. Like he clearly is trying to give away his money because he actually in some way believes in politics that you normally see in, I guess, 25-year-old college grads who are underemployed.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not really acting in his self-interest, except his self-interest is actualizing policies he agrees with. But it's not the best bang for his buck. It's more of just
except it is.
It's just his morals, right? So yeah. So that's what I'm getting at. Are you okay with that reasoning, or because the way you phrased that, I wasn't sure if that's something you're fine with.
Because okay, so like if yeah, so because you're thinking of best bang for the buck in a very limited sense, right? You're thinking of it in terms of like capital acquirement. You're thinking of terms of like how wealthy you are, but you also have to think about like what makes you feel good, right? And if it generally makes him feel good to even give all his money away, I'm not going to be disgusted by that. I'm going to ask, okay, first of all, can you do that, right? Do you have the power? Can you, right? Like maybe you would have people stopping you, right? Or maybe you would have circumstances stopping you. Maybe like you might say, I want to give all my money away, 100%. and then the next day you get some illness, and then like you say, well, I don't really care about my illness, so I'm gonna keep going with my getting away my money. And then sure, which or whether you decide to keep some of your money to treat the illness. Either way, you are still working for your self-interest. I don't think that just because you're giving your money away, you're against your self-interest. Because if that's what you want to do, then that's what you want to do. Now, of course, if you do not have the power, then you cannot fulfill that will.
So if there was a person who so if you can imagine a person who is in your situation, and then we could dub them something like Bizarro World Kohei, and he's you in your situation, but all of his policy goals are completely flipped. So imagine you wanted universal health care, health coverage for everybody. He wanted the most privatized system possible. That wouldn't be inconsistent as long as the elements of power are still in place. He could come to the opposite policy conclusions as you, as it doesn't undermine, I guess, the points you're making in any degree.
Hold on. Sorry about the background noise, but you mentioned you mentioned as long as if the power is still in place. It's never gonna go away though. That's the point that I'm trying to get at. If it's never gonna go away, if there are circumstances that overpower me to have different moralities, different different policies that I support, then it's not that power suddenly went away, right? There are powers that prevent me from saying certain things. There are powers that allow me to say certain things, right? If I am poor, then that will probably prevent me from supporting inequality more, right? I think it's very possible that in that alternate universe, someone like that person could exist. However, I think for that person to have those certain views, I would assume that other circumstances in that world are flipped as well. But that's just this world imposing how that world works. I don't know. The point is, power's still going to be there, and I don't see the insanity in that.
Is it fair in this part of the conversation to speak a little more about power's connection to morality? We kind of started talking about it, but I think we could go even deeper on
I
that.
can talk about anything. If Mr. Keck has more questions about policies and ideologies, you can go at it.
I think I'm just kind of I think I'm still kind of in the same boat that I was a few minutes ago, though, where I'm satisfied with what you said because in the way of my phrasing the question, I agreed with what you said. It's just the same reason why I guess I'm skeptical of this being a useful conceptualization outside of either if you're a political organizer or if you're a self-help guru or you're looking for that type of information. I think that this is a beneficial framework of thinking. So I do think that there is utility. Like if you think of Jordan Peterson, I think a lot of what you're saying about self-actualization and thinking about goals and aiming for something and knowing what you have potential to aim for. I think it is valuable to those degrees. I'm just trying to grasp at anything beyond, I guess, a Tony Robbins rules for radicals hybrid of value, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't say that to belittle the value of that too, because I'm a person who values the individual more than anything. And so I think self-actualization is probably one of the most important things. And if this is something that you can frame to people to help them actualize the best version of themselves, then I think that's great.
Yeah. You see, I again, this is the same problem that the Mr. Hazelwood presented when he asked about, like, is this related to the survival of the fittest? Because when we talk about survival of the fittest, you're kind of presupposing that surviving is the goal, right? Right now you're kind of surviving. You're kind of presupposing that, like, doing what's best for you is the goal. Self-actualizing is the goal.
Well, I don't think that's other people's goals, because a lot of people intentionally do not live up to their potential, I guess. And you would say they are living up to their potential because that's the furthest they can actually do.
Yeah.
But I would say that you can have people interfere, like in CBT therapy, people interfere and those people get a better outcome in the end than if CBT didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's kind of what I was getting at, but I understand the point you're making there.
There's nothing wrong with that, right? and then like you were afraid that like, oh, I'm belittled, and then or you're that you don't want to belittle my points. Well, it doesn't really matter what you think of my conception, because how do I explain this? So like, for better or for worse, is the foundation, is what I'm trying to say. So like, if I have this mindset of conception of power, and it gets me to places that I want to go, then power was involved. If it does not get me to places I want to go, power was still involved. So it's like, you don't really have to worry about belittling my idea, because whether it's beneficial for someone, whether it's detrimental, power is still involved.
Yeah,
So
but okay, but I think the only reason I'm making that point though is because there's a reason why I don't listen to podcasts about the concrete that makes the sidewalks outside, right? I walk on sidewalks all the time, and they're going to be there whether I know anything about them or not. So I guess what I'm trying to think is there more to be gained from using power as a foundation versus conceptualizing things in ways that are more helpful to people? That's the only reason why I guess I'm taking that take
Yes,
on it.
yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You okay. So if you were to realize, how do I say this? Maybe conceptualizing power as it is, as I just said, it isn't the best way to reach your ends.
I
Which means
think
that
I
you
can.
have to have.
I think I can kind of get you guys more on a better footing, or I think I can find a way to bring your guys' points together, if you don't mind, Kohei.
Sure.
You can finish up, but then I'll.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say that if you want a different mindset, if you want a different conceptualizing of it, first of all, that involves power to do so. Now you're right. Now you are no longer thinking of power in that sense. Now, um, so is it always something that's like again, like maybe it's not useful to you, right? Like it's like you don't listen to podcasts about what makes a concrete on the sidewalk. That's because, well, it does, like, that's because listening to those podcasts isn't something that is in your self-interest. So you don't have to. So like, is it in that sense? No, it's not applicable for everyone. It's applicable for me because, like, when I think about this, I kind of like I kind of like figure out, like, okay, well, what makes something a sidewalk, what makes something not a sidewalk, and I like thinking about that, right? So it is from a self-interest. However, maybe you have, maybe you say, you know what, if I have time thinking about that, I'm gonna spend time thinking about how to make money, right? So maybe so maybe you're not even gonna be focused on the conception of power, and yeah, you don't have to. So should everyone conceive power like this? No. Is my conception of power still involved? Probably. I hope you're satisfied with that answer.
So, and I see that we have a timer again. Um,
You probably
so
like put in your
I brought
settings
up.
or something.
I'm sorry.
It's probably in your settings or something.
Well, no, it's I have to pay money to get it sorted out.
Mm.
But anyway, I want to go back to kind of the philosophical, then kind of tie it back into the political and the ethical. I brought up Nietzsche at the beginning of the episode because it seemed to me that your conception of morality was very similar to his conception of morality. Both of you are, shall we say, people who think a little amorally, which is different from immorally. I'm not here saying, oh, you're a bad person, you do bad things, you're immoral. I'm saying you are at some, or your worldview or your philosophy is amoral. And so is Nietzsche's. You're separating morality. You're sort of saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear you saying, like, it's you're not appealing to kind of moral intuitions. You're not appealing to certain ideals that are right or wrong, except maybe from a subjective standpoint, except from the standpoint of, this is kind of what I think, this is my life, this is what I want out of life, this is what I personally subjectively think is right or wrong. But you're not appealing to some kind of broader ideals. You're not a kind of, in other words, I guess, which you're not, and Nietzsche wasn't either. You're not kind of prescribing how things should be, so to speak. and I think Matt over here is a bit more prescriptive. And when I say that, I'm not saying like, oh, he thinks everyone needs to do X, Y, or Z, or they're bad people and they're going to go to hell, or they need to be shot or whatever. But he is saying he does have a more overarching worldview of how he wants society to be, and he does appeal more to certain moral intuitions, certain moral presuppositions, like the idea that coercion is wrong, and the idea that voluntary interaction is how people should be able to engage with the surrounding world. So I suppose at that level, then maybe you could almost say that I'm in between the two of you, or I take certain ideas from Matt and certain ideas from Kohei. I'll say that, and you can respond.
Yeah.
But well, let me finish. I think so. From like a practical standpoint, I guess I could see certain value. I could see value to your concept of power, even in the political sphere. So I remember in the episode that Matt and I did on, we did an episode on the Supreme Court. I think I mentioned this in another episode actually, so I don't know. I keep mentioning this, but it's helpful for the conversation. I was willing. I sort of have this opinion. So I am a registered Democrat. I wouldn't say I really like the Democratic Party. I just think they're better than the Republican Party. But I've said before that the Republican Party does not fight fair, and so I'm willing for the Democratic Party to, as the expression goes, fight fire with fire. I'm willing for the Democratic Party to stoop lower than the Republican Party in order to go higher, if you will. So I'm willing to kind of play politics. I'm willing to if I were a practical politician, I'd be willing to get my hands dirty, because the other side is getting their hands dirty, and you can't necessarily appeal to basic goodness. So I think it was some news program recently was like, oh, Joe Biden's a good president because he's empathetic. He has empathy. Trump didn't have empathy, but now we have a president that has empathy. And it's like, well, but I mean, you can't really appeal to empathy to get your policies put in action. So if you're trying to get certain policies put into place, then I think your conception of power is useful, at least to a degree. But I'm still, I would not say I am amoral in my worldview. I still appeal to certain moral intuitions or presuppositions beyond my own subjective experience. I think it is immoral, for example, that the U.S. does not have a single payer healthcare system, that everyone does not have access to healthcare without going bankrupt, for example. So that is my overarching thoughts of based on what you guys are talking about.
Sure. If I pull up Discord on my computer, would it show on the screen? Like, would it show on the recording? All right, I'm gonna pull it up because I took some notes there. Regarding morality, but you did mention three things that I wanted to talk about, or that I wanted to respond to. First, you said that that I'm not prescriptive, right? So that's and I would actually disagree with that. I think I'm very prescriptive, because the whole point of me conceptualizing power like this is to figure out, okay, well, how can I make things go my way, right? So in that sense, I am very prescriptive, because once you realize that like um power is conceives its way, then you have to think about, okay, so what kind of modes of being is what kind of mode of being is best suited for me, right? And so yes, I am very prescriptive, because like the way I want the world to work is in a way that suits me. So in that sense, I am prescriptive.
But when I say, for example, that I'm for universal health care, I'm not just making the statement. That's just I just want that for myself. That's just a subjective evaluation that I want because it's beneficial to me.
Oh,
I'm
yes, it
saying
is.
I'm making. I guess I say when I say maybe Matt and I are more prescriptive than you are. I mean in the very basic sense of I think this policy is moral or immoral, or I think this policy should be put in place or should not be put in place for everybody. I'm making more claim. I guess Matt and I are more likely to make claims uh, for not just ourselves but other people as well. In the broader political sense, not in the sense of, oh, you shouldn't smoke cigarettes because they're bad for you, in the sense that we want this or that policy because we think it's beneficial for our society as a whole, or at least it fulfills certain moral requirements that we expect from public policy.
I would argue that that it is that your healthcare kind of thing is still kind of directly related to what best worked for you. Um, I kind of raised the examples of the community one, where it's like when people are more communal and more collective, on the surface level you might think that they are not think of themselves, but really it seems to be the case that when someone when someone when someone that it seems to be the case that if the society were to be more communal and collective, it would work out best for them. Now they may not realize it, but there seems to be a correlation to that. So I would say that you may not realize that you will benefit substantially if that kind of healthcare system was applied. However, I do think that your life itself would be benefited more.
I guess what I mean is I'm not. So let me put it to you like this. Like I agree that politics at some level, or one's political views do derive from like the individual sort of personality and needs and whatnot. I guess I'm not saying that that's not true, but I am saying that I'm appealing to something that you're not, which is again sort of universalist moral principles. I think it's I think it's a moral. I think that a country is more or less moral based on whether or not they give people health care, and that people are allowed to have health care without going bankrupt. So I'm appealing to something that you're not, I guess, but I can acknowledge that it still also goes. There are personal elements to it, but I'm not just appealing to those personal elements.
Okay, so I have kind of, I think, a hybrid take on what you're saying, because I actually think I mostly agree with a lot of what Kohei is saying as a foundation. And a lot of what I've said isn't really, I guess, in disagreement to anything he said in this whole episode. A lot of what I've asked for is I've just kind of tried to push the boundaries of it and seeing if he was willing to, I guess, expand it to places I was comfortable or uncomfortable with. But he hasn't. Well, you haven't, Kohei, which is why I'm still in agreement with you up till this point. Now, I will say the back and forth you and Matt are having right now, I think I agree with what Matt's saying, and I don't think it's contingent on, I guess, your conceptualization to push back on that. Because to refer back to what like the Ayn Rand view of what is selfish, it doesn't have to literally be like directly self-interested. So I think even if you don't agree with Matt's subjective moral evaluation of things, you can say, since he's doing what he appears in his mind to be pushing the world in the direction he wants it, you can argue that it still is a manifestation of the kind of power you're talking about. And I don't think it needs to have any like indirect subconscious. It doesn't have to have that motive, even though I would agree with you that the motive is present a lot of time, especially in people who are less politically active. The people who just show up and vote and are, I guess, what people often describe as low information voters, a lot of them vote for things that they just think are the things that give them money or something like that. But I would say the philosophy you're arguing for, I don't think it's contingent on it ending up directly helping them, because I think by it being the manifestation of Matt's moral imposition on the world, I think that's enough to justify, I guess, the kind of worldview you're laying out. So I don't think I agree with you here, but I also don't think it invalidates anything you've said previously, if that makes sense. But I also think this is kind of like a nitpick that is an unnecessary hill to fight on. But I just want to throw that out there because you guys were having your back and forth. I'm not sure if you want to add anything before I move on.
Yeah, and you know what? Okay, like maybe I don't have maybe I can't really say for sure that that healthcare has little to no is healthcare isn't a major advantage for your personal gain. However, I would still say that you are overpowered to think that way, right? You are probably overpowered to support the healthcare.
And
Could you rephrase your statement?
There are circumstances in which it makes you support your whatever you support, and the fact that you are supporting that means that you cannot overpower those circumstances.
No,
and
I think I agree with that.
okay.
I mean,
It
I
doesn't
think
necessarily mean that you're correct. It just means that
no, that's true.
that's your potential.
I mean,
And then it's like if I can like if you know if it's say it's like a 50-50, like it's a tiebreaker, it's like a referendum and you're the only one that didn't vote, and you would tip the scale, and then I don't agree with you, so like I prevent you from voting. It's like that means that like you did not have the power to overpower circumstances that would allow you to vote, because I kind of made you stay home.
yeah. Well, I guess I would just say something, and then again, Matt can add to it. I guess I don't think so. So when I guess if I'm trying to impartially kind of evaluate my worldview as a whole, I don't spend too much time thinking about power as such.
Yeah, I'll get to that later.
I made
I do have a reason. I do think I do have a hypothesis as to why I think about all the time. But go ahead.
that's fair. As I said, in the realm of just practical politics, I think about power. And I think in an episode I think we did on the death penalty, Matt and I kind of talked about free will, and so we're obviously we're not going to have a debate about free will here, but I am also, just for the record, I am a determinist, so I do believe that everything that I do and say is affected or is caused by factors beyond my control. And then I also think about, I think it's also fair to think about people everyday kind of interaction, I guess, as a struggle for some kind of power or influence or dominance. But of course, and I guess this goes back to maybe Matt's point about like Ayn Rand and whether like altruism is actually secretly selfish or whatever. Kind of just that selfish altruistic dichotomy. But so it's like when we think about I've been bringing up Darwin a lot in this podcast for some reason, but like, so evolutionary biologists kind of, when they're trying to look at, say, human morality, let's say, they look at many of them would say that there's like certain biological precursors to kind of morality, or there's like reasons, or so like our higher so to steal, I think it was I don't remember if this was the title of one of Steven Pinker's books or the subtitle, but he wrote some book, and again, the title of the subtitle was The Better Angels of Our Nature. So many evolutionary biologists would say, well, the better angels of our nature also come from nature and come from biology and genetics and evolution and whatnot. So even if I acknowledge that like certain moral presuppositions might be beyond my control, or like I didn't, like, we didn't invent them, or they go back to just the kind of nature of social of how social animals interact with each other. I think that does I think I can square that with your or I think I can square that with both my appeal to moral ideals and to the idea that power is an important part of life. But at some level, I almost feel like our moral ideals allow us to. This might be where where you and Kohei, where Matt and you are would be more in agreement, and I might diverge from the both of you. But at some level, I think that our moral intuitions might be able to help us escape kind of nature, escape biology, escape the worst angels, the escape the devils of our nature, or escape. So that's at some level why I kind of appeal to morality, appeal to ethics and whatnot, because I think there are certain aspects of our nature, of our biology, which probably aren't helpful for the world I want to live in, or the world that I think would be the best of all possible worlds, if you forgive the phrase. And so I I derive my politics and my also just my everyday interactions with, or I derive my everyday behavior from, to some degree, from those moral principles. But in short, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think I can go along with your conception of power, but I guess my worldview emphasizes different things. So it's not necessarily that you're wrong, or not necessarily that we disagree, but we're emphasizing different things, which is it's not uncommon when philosophers are, or just amateur philosophers or professional philosophers are talking about these things. They might agree about the broad points, but they're just emphasizing different things.
Just to be clear, you are emphasizing on what best constitutes your ideals, like what kind of world best constitutes your ideals.
Correct. I'm emphasizing my ideals. Yeah.
And why is that? Why do you care about your ideals? Why do you care about constructing a world that constitutes your ideals?
Well, I guess the simplest way to answer your question would be, I have an idea, and I could be completely wrong about this, but I don't think I am. I have this idea of kind of human nature. I have an idea of what constitutes the good life, what people need, generally what people want. And so I think that my morality, and then that too, and by extension, I think my politics kind of account for both people's wants and desires from a big picture standpoint, from the perspective of kind of us as biological organisms, not necessarily from this or that ideology, if that makes sense.
So it seems like Kohei is trying to make so I can tell Kohei just wants to say, yeah, but you're doing that because you have the power to do that. And obviously Matt is accepting that, though. So that doesn't really kind of like mean.
The other thing was that it is to his advantage. That's power, and is to his advantage.
Well, yeah, but I think we're entering a time loop where I kind of say what I said a minute ago about how if he has a subjective moral analysis, then he perceives that as advantageous just because he's trying to actualize how he thinks the world should be. I think that's where I end up seeing it. But I think I think the point still stands that me and Matt can have worldviews, and we don't have to, I guess, emphasize what you're kind of arguing for, because I think I'm willing to accept, if I'm pushed on everything that Kohei said. I just don't think it really changes anything I already believed before the conversation, which is, I think, the sticking point I'm kind of getting at, and me and Matt aren't sure is where we should end up, or if you would argue beyond that. And I don't think you are, which is fine. But that could be what we're trying to confirm, I guess.
Are you basically asking, would your question be, could it be rephrased as, so what do about it?
Well, it could be, is there anything ideologically inconsistent about Matt being, a Marxist, and then me being, and I know he resents when I summarize anything he believes in one word, and I know that's not even super accurate, but if I was going to summarize his views as Marxist and mine as anarcho-capitalist, is there anything inconsistent with taking your conception of power and then being those things, except for, I guess, how likely it is to actualize those things in the United States right now? And I've already accepted that we're not like, and me and Matt both regularly accept that our worldviews aren't going to be enacted in the United States right now.
No. It doesn't. How realistic it can be accepted isn't implemented, isn't very relevant. It's how much would it benefit you should it be implemented. And the degree to which it should benefit you is the degree to which you're probably gonna be vocal about it.
Can you clarify what you mean by that? How vocal we'd be about it?
So if my ear stopped ringing, I would be very happy. But I'm not complaining about it 24/7 because my life's not going to change very much. If it does change a lot, then I'm gonna be more vocal about it. Um, so if your views are implemented and like you get super well off, then you're probably going to be more vocal about it. The other thing is when people complain, it's usually because they can't do anything else. So the degree to which the state is strong in not implementing your view, and you can't do anything else. Is you also be vocal about it. Now you were saying like, oh, is it inconsistent because is it inconsistent because it's not probably not going to be implemented? No, because whether it can or cannot be implemented is I don't think is very relevant because should does not deal with what could. Should deals with um should it deals with outside the realm of it deals with could, but it also deals with what couldn't. And should is basically saying here's the things that couldn't, but it must be could. It would be very great if it was in the realm of could. So the fact that it's hard to implement is I don't think very relevant.
Okay. Yeah, that's I think we're on the same page then. Do you want to add something, Matt?
Yeah, actually, I need a point of clarification myself. So is it not? So like because Matt doesn't have the ability at this time to kind of create an anarcho-capitalist society, what does that say about his power? Like I guess I was a little confused as to why maybe power wasn't necessarily relevant in the context of whether or not Matt or I could create a United States that we would prefer over the current one.
Well, it's because might doesn't make right. He's not arguing that might makes right. So it doesn't matter that we can't actualize it. It doesn't matter that if I attempt to secede from the Union and the government might come and shoot me down and I would die.
No, I am saying it does.
So okay, so then I do need your clarification.
Yes, and also the other Hazelwood needs clarification too, because what did you say? You said that power is not relevant in.
Well, no. What I was asking was like because Matt can't create Ancapistan tomorrow. Like I would think that does have something to say about his power. But that's not necessarily. Again, I guess at some level, maybe the difference between Matt and myself and you would be, I think we just separate power and morality a bit more than you do. I'll speak for myself anyway. I separate power and morality a bit more than you do, Kohei. So I guess, but like, do you get my point or?
Yeah, you said something about how power is irrelevant in.
I was asking why it would be irrelevant in the fact that Matt, being an anarcho-capitalist, cannot create anarcho-capistan.
It's the other way around. It's why is your inability irrelevant to your power? It's because power is very relevant in your inability because because the level of power dictates your level of ability, but your level of inability only shows how much your power has. It doesn't give your ability does not give you power. Your ability to implement it is a manifestation of that power. So it's not very. So it's the other way around, is what I was trying to say. It's not that because you said that it's irrelevant. That the lack of implementation is irrelevant in regards to his power.
No, I wasn't making any statement. I was asking a questions. I apologize if I wasn't clear about that.
Okay, so the true answer that I will say is your power is very. Your ability is dependent on your power. So ability is on the y-axis, power is on the x-axis. And yes, and so now that we got that cleared up, yes, I do believe might makes right, but we would have to clarify what that means. It's not that might is right, because there is no right.
So clarify what you mean by might makes right then.
Okay, so because we live in a reality where we cannot objectively say what's good or bad, the only way to see it's like I don't know. It's like if you slap me across the face, subjectively, I think that's bad. but that's probably because you being slapped across my face is detrimental to my self-interest. So that's probably why I'm gonna say it's bad. And then I'm gonna say, well, you shouldn't harm people. It's against the law. Like those are basically justifications of my self-interest. Now, but I can't really stop the fact that you slapped me across the face. So it might as well be right. That's what I mean by might makes right. It makes up for it, right? Like we can't really say that it's right or wrong, but the fact that you've already had the power to do it means that like it makes up for it. We don't know if it's right, but the fact that you had the might makes up for right. It's like a substitute. It's
Okay, so
So
I'm gonna be harsh on what you just said. I'm
Okay.
going to be harsh. I'm
All right.
just gonna put it that way. So I think what you said is valid, but I think if you ever start with, I believe that might makes right, and then here's why. I think you're going to completely lead people down a completely different line of thought, because I don't think anybody would think what you just said means that might makes right. So you probably should say might doesn't make right, but it almost does in practice.
That's what might makes right means.
No. Well, okay. So people could have the misconception that if somebody said the phrase might makes right, that they would think that the power behind something makes something moral. Well, here's the thing, dude. If I come over to Matt, I don't know how large you are, Kohei, in real life, but I'm a big dude. So if I go up to Matt and we're in a place where there's no weapons, I'm not gonna say that if the co-hosts of Beyond Talking Points are gonna have a physical altercation, I would win. But I'm pretty sure, like, I have an MMA background. I'm a big guy. It's like, Matt, you're not gonna win the fight. I'm older than you. I'm bigger than you. It's just gonna happen. I'm sorry. So here's the thing. If I beat up Matt, obviously in that situation that I laid out, assuming what I said was true, Matt would not have grounds for retaliation because he couldn't physically do them. And I think we would all agree based on that is true.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that has any implications on any type of ethic or any type of moral.
True.
So if you say the sentence might makes right, but then agree with what I just said, that could be seen as it could be seen as misleading. That's what I'm laying out for you. So I agree with you, but I just would say don't frame it that way, because everybody's going to bastardize what you said.
Okay. So. Okay. All right. But okay. So this is like why framing. I feel like the irony is that we were very careful on laying out what I meant by power, and then when we really should have laid out the terms, we were very not careful. Yes. Okay. So I get that, like do people really conceptualize it as like whoever has the power to whoever the degree to which you have the degree to which there's power behind the action is the degree to which it's right?
Well, I think that's the underpinnings of when people appeal to like law, is a lot of that.
Okay.
And there have been philosophers. I mean, I mentioned Machiavelli and his philosophy in the first, like in my opening monologue about it, for a reason, because Machiavelli is, and I mean he's where the phrase Machiavellian comes from, someone who's very cunning and calculated and gets what they want through possibly or probably nefarious means, but. So I mean, there have been people in history who have been like, yeah, if I'm stronger than you and bigger than you and smarter than you, I have a right to take your land. I mean, I take your land or your property or beat you up or whatever.
Which I would disagree with, but go on.
Because that is just who I am and that is who you are. But nowadays, most people would not conceptualize it that way. And in fact, it's funny. I was actually reading a Wikipedia article about the phrase might makes right, and there was a quote from Abraham Lincoln, and I'm gonna mess up the quote off the top of my head, but he actually flips it around. He's like, right makes might or right is might, and that's basically the philosophy or the worldview of the modern person. The person is like the person who is morally correct, is the one that has the high ground, whether or not they have the power to get their ideals put into practice, or whether they're actually like elected leaders, or even if they're totally obscure and have no power whatsoever, they might have morally correct beliefs.
Okay.
That's at least my idea. That's how I would phrase how a modern person would kind of understand the phrase "might makes right." They would say they would agree with Matt that sentence means might makes right, not might is right makes right in practice. Might makes right. Period. From a moral perspective.
I'm glad that you mentioned Wikipedia because it literally says it asserts that a society's views of right or wrong is determined by those in power, with a meaning similar to history is written by the victor. Here's where it gets important. That is, although all people have their personal ideas of good, only those strong enough to overcome obstacles and enemies can put their ideas into effect and spread their own standards to society at large. What this means is that the literally, if assuming that Wikipedia is like the general consensus, because it's a pretty mainstream information source, um, especially as like a go-to kind of place. Um, Assuming that's correct, like assuming that it is the general consensus, and that means like the general consensus agrees with me. Like, and it was only through recently that uh I don't know, it says according to Wikipedia, sociologist Max Weber analyzed the relations between a state's power and its moral authority. Yeah, and it's where it's and it's only been recently as it's described in like the connotations of like totalitarianism, regimes, things like that, and it's also recently connotated with like brute force, which I explained at the beginning of the show that it's not just brute force, like it's other means. If you're nice to people and um they are nice to you back because you have that power to like get that relationship going, then you have that power and you also have that might. And I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it might as well be because that's what happened.
Well, and I guess I'm going to use my power to prevent Matt from responding to you by responding to you in turn, and by going to or by appealing to another episode we did. So I don't remember the episode number, but we did an episode titled "Was U.S. Involvement in World War II Justified?" And I bring that topic, that obscure topic, up because Matt was taking the position that, well, no, World War II, the U.S. involvement in World War II was not justified. And I bring that up because you brought up the phrase, the history is written by the victors. And I have the impression, and I'm not trying to put words in Matt's mouth, so Matt, if I'm misrepresenting your views, you let me know. But I think Matt would say just because the Allies won the war doesn't mean they have the moral high ground. Now that doesn't mean now Matt's not a Nazi. Matt doesn't believe it. Matt was not for the Axis powers, or I mean, Matt does not believe that the Axis powers had the moral high ground either. But I think that's a concrete example. Just because someone was a victor in certain battle or in certain ideological fights or whatever, it doesn't necessarily make them moral. It just means for whatever reasons, for certain factors led to them winning. So I would say the same thing. History might be written by the victors, but the victors aren't always right.
Well, and so to kind of bounce off that, and then to tie into what Kohei is saying, I think in practice, me and Matt aren't really disagreeing with Kohei. It's more of I think we're disagreeing, I guess, the way he's either portraying it or the way he's I guess how much he is emphasizing it. So here's something that's, I guess, relevant. Me and Matt have done 2 episodes where we talked about the coronavirus policies. And I am super anti really any government intervention that's happened. And I think it's probably the most disgusting thing that's happened in government in the last like 10 years. And I think they've needlessly put restrictions on people that have destroyed people's lives, all based on bad reading of all kinds of data. And I have no faith that the most common interpretations of the event that is going to be portrayed in the most like NPR type of news coverage is going to flip the script and agree with me overnight. So for the person who doesn't pay much attention to politics, the people who don't want to do certain types of research, and the people who trust generic mainstream outlets, what Kohei is saying is, well, the people from NPR might as well be right, because they're the ones who have the megaphone. They're the ones that's controlling the message that I think is deeply wrong and has led to all sorts of terrible things and has ruined people's lives. So I'm willing to cede that for all intents and purposes, NPR is the one in control and then they're doing something. But I just don't see the need to say, therefore, to some extent, it might as well be right. I mean, it's like you can say it might as well be right, but I don't think that has any bearing on if it's right or wrong. I think a better reading of the analysis, and if you actually form an honest narrative, then they're completely wrong. And I think this is like a deeply evil thing that's happening right now in our society. So this is why I'm kind of like, I'm pushing back to where I'm saying like, yeah, Kohei, if your argument is just, it might as well be as if they're right because most people are going to think that's right because they're the ones who have the megaphone, then it's like, well, of course. I mean, that's just like an inherently true, obvious thing. It's just, if we're going to have a discussion where we're exploring truth, then that's not really helpful. It's more helpful to go, okay, well, here's why I think the mainstream narrative's wrong. Here's what I see as the data that points to that. And we need to try to undermine the mainstream narrative. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but then you mentioned the truth, and you're mentioning, but then that implies that assumes that going for the truth is good.
Well, okay, so do you want to bring the conversation back to moral relativism and trying to derive morals from certain things? Is that where I guess we need to have this standoff to make any ground?
I mean, if that, sure, I'm down for anything. I mean, yeah, like I'm just saying that it's a how do I because the issue is it's not very simple to talk to you because you don't necessarily disagree with me, right? The problem
Exactly.
is it's like you agree with me, but then you're like, so what? We should be emphasizing something else.
This is why I said earlier that I think Matt and I just our worldviews aren't necessarily incompatible with what you're saying. This is kind of what Matt's saying as well, but we're emphasizing different things. I think.
Or
Okay.
I'm trying to take what you're saying. I'm trying to push the ball forward and see where it goes.
So all right, so we can go that route. Then what I will say is okay. So you really do not like the fact that they might as well be right. You agree with it, but you don't like it. And then okay, well then I could say okay, well then your next step is to acquire power so that you can get the megaphone. You can spew out what you think is right. And are you right? I don't know. Should you be right? Might as well be right. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the specific phrase I'm pointing at, I guess I'm pushing against is you can imagine if I'm going to assume that like everybody in this chat thinks that the Jews getting killed in World War II was bad. I'm going to make that assumption, and then we can just imagine a world where we know that or I guess I'd say that we've done our moral analysis of the situation, and we think the Jews getting killed was bad, but then every single other person around us and everything on TV was like, no, that was great. So this is why me and Matt, I think, are less hesitant to say it might as well be right that they're saying it, because I guess we're trying to underline that the phrase "it might as well be right," that thing about things being right and being the truth is like, I think the way you're using it is less, I guess, careful or sacred than what me and Matt are trying to get at, which could be why we can agree with what you're getting at, but we're trying to say, but is it, if you conceptualize right or moral or truth in a way that is higher, can you really say what you're saying and mean it? Do we have to have different meanings of what what right really means? Because if you live in that society, then you could say, well, yeah, all the Jews getting killed, what was right? Because they're the ones who are in control, and that's their messaging. But then me, Matt, I think would be very quick to be like, well, but we know needless people getting slaughtered for bigoted reasons is just generally bad. So we don't want to say that might as well be right.
Yeah. So then, well then to reword you from my conception, we would say, okay, I would not want to live in that world, right? I would not want to live in that world. So we have to like do something about it, right? We have to kind of stir up the waters. We have to gather the means, and we have to change the narrative, right? Which is basically to say we need power. Which is basically to say we need power to kind of like start influencing, start being vocal about it, start advocating, fight for what we think is right. Does that make us right? Again, I don't know. But then like, again, now tell me if I'm like perpetuating the same loop. But like all I'm saying is like if you are to say that, oh, it might as well be right, if you are to say they might as well be right and I give up, then that means you concluded that um there is no shot. But the fact that you are saying, okay, well, just because they might as well be right doesn't mean that I'm gonna stay quiet, or I'm still gonna try to change the narrative for my own advantage. Which means that they don't have all the might, though, right? They have the might to have that narrative, but they don't have the might to change to have that enforce that narrative onto every single person. So in that sense, you have the might to believe in what you believe, and so you might as well be right in believing that. And then you can say, okay, well, if I might as well be right in believing that, do I have the power to change the opinion of my best friend, the opinion of his best friend, not well, opinion of his friends, and the opinion of like the community? And really, um, I don't think, and if you think of it like that, I don't think my view is very pessimistic, right? I don't think it's like, oh, be all end all. They have the might. Let's let's uh let's give up the fight here. No, it's if you can still fight for it, then like you have that might. So and to the degree to which you can you want to play with that might, go ahead, go for it.
I guess the only way I would challenge this is more beneficial, but I don't know if I don't know if it will be, and we should probably try to get to some closing thoughts. But I would just say, well, if you take it to another level, like you take it out of our current world and you make it like a technocracy that is ruled by like everybody's in like their own enclosed cage, and there's a panopticon and it can see your thoughts. Then the second you even have the thought that what might be going on is evil, they remove any capacity you have to have that thought. They have the ultimate power, and nobody has any power to actualize the thoughts that disagree with them. Then there's nobody with the thought that what they're doing is wrong. Then what are the implications of that when there's absolutely no avenues to dissent? And I think you probably have a fair answer, but that's the last thing I'll say there, and then you can say
Yeah.
something, Kohei, and then Matt can
Yeah.
get his last thoughts, and we'll wrap up.
In that sense, like your fate is in the powers that be. Like you can't even hope that like the powers that be go to your favor, because then that means they terminate you. Um, but yeah, so like right now you just set up a hypothetical, even worse example, right? And like so the degree to which it's more disadvantageous to you is the degree to which they might as well be right, right? The degree to which you can like do some pushback and do some resistance is the degree to which they might as well not be right, because you have that ability to push back.
So I guess what I would say for my final thoughts. Well, okay. So Matt reminded me. For class, I recently had to finish. I had to read George Orwell's 1984. And that was the setting of that novel is like a perfect example of a situation where the individual's ability to resist is practically impossible. And the whole well, spoilers if anyone hasn't. Well, I won't. I'll try not to spoil it too much. But basically, the whole plot of the novel is the main character's will being broken down. The main characters, the party, the government is attempting to make the protagonist submit to the party and their ideology and their way of life. So I guess I would agree with Matt that about that point. And then the other thing I would want to say is I think maybe we just so when you bring up things like right, for example, like right or wrong, good or bad, good or evil, I guess I find it can be hard to talk about because I guess it depends how it depends, I guess, on the epistemological lens we're looking through. So it's like a astronomer would say that the Earth revolves around the sun, and that's a right, that's the fact, that's a correct answer. Now, from my perspective, from my subjective standpoint, I don't see the Earth revolve around the sun. I see the sun in the sky, and that's all that's my own subjective evaluation of it.
That's not a moral statement, though.
That's not a moral. No, you're right. But I was bringing. But so I was bringing up epistemological different epistemological lenses for a reason. Like there's right or wrong in terms of like factual statements about the universe in themselves. And then I think there are moral statements, which I think can be right or wrong, but we're just using a different we're using right or wrong in a different context. I'm okay with saying the Holocaust was wrong, period, no questions asked. But I'm not. I don't have to. I'm not giving a. I'm not saying there's like some fact of the. I'm not saying that like that is built into the structure of the universe. I'm not saying the universe is like created in such a way necessarily as to make that wrong. I'm saying within the context of human interactions, that's wrong because of the needless human suffering that causes. And at some level, I know people at that point, someone would, a skeptic would say, well, then you're assuming that needless human suffering is wrong. And that, you can't, that's just a personal subjective assessment. But I guess at some level, I almost think that's where the subjective objective question breaks down, which is sort of a point that I made in the conversation that Matt and Keegan and I had when we were talking about the conversation between Michel Foucault and Noam Chomsky. I guess I'm more willing to use terms like right or wrong or good and evil without necessarily being proven 100% that I am right.
So basically I am on board with what you just said, right? And then like the question isn't really like what's right or wrong, it's how good can we impose our own subjective view, right? And it's like, okay, like if you kill me, then I can't appeal to you and say, that's not very kind of you, right? Because then that assumes that, like, appealing to kind, like being kind is a good thing. So like right, like, so from a practical standpoint, I think like my conception holds some water to it, because like, it's like you can't say, oh, it's my right to have free speech, and then if the state comes and says, too bad, it's like what are you gonna do? Are you gonna like give him a book about the Constitution, and then expect the state to, oh crap, I forgot about this, yeah, here, I'll give you back your free speech, no problem. No, it's like you can't do that, right? And so, like, really, I think if you emphasize on power, it's like, boom, it's like you have the then you don't really have to like appeal to morality. And if you notice like diplomatic relations, people who appeal to morality tend to be the ones that can't do anything else, right? And like that's the only avenue that they have, usually, not always. Yeah, so like I really like what you said there, Matthew, both of you. Now I will say why I do think that I emphasize on power a lot, because I think that's an important. I did say that I will do that, so I'll do it right now. So, if you've ever read A Crime and Punishment, right? Have you?
I'm familiar with it. I haven't read it.
Yeah. Okay. So, um, earlier, Mr. Hazelwood said that he will, be okay. He would be okay with like his party going to dirty means just to like have his way. And then I would argue that like you're wishing to do something but you can't. Like if you actually cannot bear the consequences, is the degree to which like that's your limit of power, right? Whether right, and then it's like, okay, so maybe I'm like very fixated on, maybe the reason why I emphasize power isn't so much about power, but it's my moral subjectivism. And I'm like, okay, well, why do I always think about moral subjectivism all the time? And it could be the case that my life would be so much better if there was no objective reality, just because of my temperament, right? I tend to like not like I tend to like boxes, like I tend to like rules, insofar as I don't have to follow them all the time. If there were no rules, then I wouldn't know what to do, right? I would have to have some frame of reference. So okay, so like I need people to say this is what's good, this is what's bad, and then like I say, well, actually, no, because of this, and then kind of live my own way. So I kind of need that like subjectivity. But then it's like, so that's why I think, right? Like the same way with like same way with, like again, it goes back to like, why do rich people support inequality? Well, because it like it benefits them. Like why do I emphasize on moral subjectivity? Well, because it benefits me. Why did Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment think that he can get away with these things? Because if he could, then it would have benefited his own interest, right? So then it's like, okay, well, if what I'm doing is just as good or bad as what you're doing, and there's no way to tell which good way to tell what it is, then that means the only um, relevant factor is what's behind the morality, which is the ability to implement the morality, and which is power. So I think that's why I'm focused on power so much, right? It's not necessarily that I'm correct or incorrect in focusing on power. It's just that like that's just how I best function.
I just want to be, I just want to be clear really quickly. Make one quick point. When I say I'm willing to use, this is the final point, I promise. When I say I'm would be willing for the Democrats to use like dirty means to get their ends, I guess there comes a point when I do not support the dirty means, right? Like, so you have to evaluate you have to evaluate the dirty means, or you have to evaluate what they're doing and any consequences of those actions, and you have to decide whether the consequences are worth the the benefits, and so therefore based on those calculations, I would say you can figure out whether you should or should not do X, Y, or Z. So yeah, that was in the context of just everyday politics. I'm not opposed to being a little Machiavellian in that sense, but I'm not going to be totally Machiavellian. I'm not giving up morality completely and just saying it's free for all based on ability. I just wanted to make that clear.
I'm glad that Kohei you did tease it earlier, and I was happy when you teased it because I was interested in hearing that, and I think it opens a lot of doors to if we decide to have another hour and a half argument on all sorts of things, because I think the moral subjectivism is the real roadblock we kind of ran into, and I do think that sheds light on thinking about power in a way that might get us. I don't want to say more progress, but I think it might get us into the weeds on some things that are very interesting, and I think there could be a lot of could be a lot of good discussion there. And Kohei, of course, we appreciate that you came on and you told us about how you're conceptualizing things, because it's always good food for thought. And we always like having different voices on here. So Kohei, if you want to, I know you have a YouTube channel. If you want to talk about that for a little bit, sure. you can tell them where to find more of your content, what kind of content you put out.
So it's in my name. Is my name present on the recording?
Yeah, you might want to say it for people who listen on podcast.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're watching this, like, you would see that it's called Existentialist Non Grata. It's on YouTube, mostly. Although, yeah, so it's on YouTube, right? So it's like, what do I do on YouTube? Well, I basically just like have a book club on my own, and every week I go over 2 books at a time with some friends, and we really go over the core ideas about a book. So we cover Dostoevsky, we cover Nietzsche, we cover Camus, we cover Ernst Jünger, we cover everybody, right? And as long as it's philosophy or literature with philosophical themes, we cover it. I also do book reviews and book analysis on those videos. Point is, if you like philosophy, and especially if you like existentialism, check it out. Make sure to give me a listen. Now, if you're more inclined to like podcast or Spotify, I am lagging on that, but I will post the book club recordings on there too. Usually on Spotify. Yeah. So that's it for me, really. If you, and I guess for the viewers on YouTube, you could just put it in the link or something. That's
awesome. Thanks, Kohei. And I think Matt can put that in the YouTube link, and then I usually steal his description for the podcast, so you'll be able to find a link there to check that out. And that's definitely a good resource to have, because a lot of people don't read through the classics. And I'm not calling anybody out in this chat, because I'd be calling out myself, because I'm the one who definitely is not oriented in that direction. And it's always good to get primers on things if you're not going to investigate them on your own. And as we've learned through this, Kohei does think about things a lot, and he's definitely a good resource on that. So I will say, if you want to find more of our content, I have my own solo podcast where I usually talk specifically about United States politics. I'm usually taking things from an anti-government ANCAP type view and talking about why democracy is awful and all that good stuff. You can find that on any podcatcher. It's the Obey Podcast. And you can find me on Twitter at the Obey Podcast or at Matthew T. Keck. And then you can find the other Matt's YouTube channel. He's the ENT philosopher. He posts reviews and similar things of the sort. And you can also,
and I'm working on a solo podcast myself. I just haven't got all my ducks in a row, but I'm gonna tease that already.
all you have to do for a solo podcast is get really upset at the news every day, and then you have 30 minutes of content. It's real simple. Okay, and then you can find, obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're aware of our channel at Beyond Talk. Well, it's just Beyond Talking Points, and you have our whole backlog of, I guess, 50 episodes now that you could check out if you found this one interesting. And we argue about all sorts of philosophical and political issues. And we're on any podcatcher if you just search Beyond Talking Points. We appreciate you guys listening, and feel free to subscribe or leave a review. But for now, signing off, it's Matt, and Kohei.
Bye-bye.